this thing works. Great. Yeah, great. So I'm Dr. Riaan Steenberg. I'm the Director of Operations for the NetEd Group, and specifically Eduvos, which is private higher education institution. And thank you, Prof. Ernest, for calling us competition, because I don't think we are. I think we're serving a different market, a different perspective that we need to bring to the education space. But I think it's really important for us to talk about reforming higher education in South Africa. What are the challenges, opportunities, and the strategic reforms? Because otherwise, in a year's time, we'll have the same conversation, and in 5 years' time, we'll have the same conversation, but the country would be in a very different place. I will start off with an interesting aspect in terms of some of the current challenges. And I think the biggest challenge, and thanks, Prof. Ernest, I really enjoyed your speech, because there's so much of what you say that is true, but the key issue is that for the public education system, you are not free. Okay. Academic freedom was taken away with the NQF and the PQM. Before that, you were free. But the minute we started doing that, we started defining a model by which we can educate people that is linked to an economy, that is linked to a growth plan. And unfortunately, the people that set that up aren't around anymore. So we have some tough choices to make. To be a student in South Africa today, I think is really, really challenging. That's the picture. We have massive mental health issues, stress, burnout, inadequate resources, no accommodation, NSFAS, funding delays, all of that type of stuff. It's just hectic. And I just want to acknowledge Age Education, which is where I met Africa for the first time, where we had this debate with this sector. I think what's interesting to note, and I'll spend a little bit more time on it, is that a third of first-time students are now in private education. Okay? We often say that the gap for education is about 300,000 people that are not getting space. There are 615,000 students that qualify for higher education every year, and the public system only provides for 209 of those spaces. And I would also ask Prof. Asad Jamin to just update his slide to also show what the private education sector is doing in that. The problem is that this difference between how many people are in the private education and private and public education space and the people that need to go into the workforce, those people are being asked to go into TVET and CET sectors where 50% of them remain unemployed after they've completed in those sectors. And that's not okay. So the journey of a student, if you now, anybody here has children that are going to university in the next couple of years? Okay, I see a couple of hands there, okay. Have you told your child that they need to get an average of somewhere between 75 to 85% to get admission? Okay. If you do not get that, you do not have admission. Okay. I've seen queues of 3,000 people for 600 seats at public universities. Okay. Interesting and fun fact is that 7 out of 10 people surveyed in public institutions are not studying what they intended to study. How are you then free to choose your future? How can you make that meaningful contribution that you've spent all that time in school envisioning? We have about 50–60% of that is funded through NSFAS, which even my good friend doesn't really want to comment on, because it's just a painful system, and it's not sustainable. And it has funded the same number of students for the last 8 years. Okay, it cannot grow. We cannot afford to do that. And the other 50% are high performers that are going. Now, I think of this as a type of Hunger Games, okay, where you go and you are ready to go to university. You first hurdle that you have to get through to survive is you have to get past an 80% average, because otherwise you're not going to get space. Okay. The next hurdle that you're going to get through, if you want accommodation, you need to get at least 85% currently. Okay. My son had 87% average, and he was only offered a second draft. He was put on a waiting list to get into university accommodation. Okay. That's real. There are people that are actively employed at your institutions today to get people out of your university, because we cannot afford for them to stick around for the whole process. Cool. Okay, so now I do get admission. Only 60% of those first years will drop off. Yeah? And that's actually by design. We can't afford for them all to go to second year, because we don't have spaces for them, because we need to cater for next year's stuff. Okay. 50% of those will drop off in the second year, 75% of those in third year. And Prof. Jamin showed us the stat that from the 100 students that started, 20 of them will end up completing their third year. Yes? Now, if I put in a tank full of petrol and I wanted to get 300 kilometers far, yeah, but 20% of the way, it's finished. What am I now? I'm stuck. And this is the problem, is the people that we've put through this human capital development system are getting stuck at the 20% mark. And our research shows that those people then actually go back home and sit on couches. They don't enter the productive economy at the same rate. Okay? And then we're worried about graduate unemployment, we're worried about all of these other things, but we've got a system that actually produces failure. Okay? So, first thing that I think you should change, okay, because I don't have this problem, you have this problem. My institution is growing at 35% year on year and has done so for 5 years in a row. We have 22,000 students. Every single student that comes there, we try to help. Okay? Every student that comes there can choose what they want to study. Not because I am not providing them with the relevant depth and teaching them about philosophy and ethics and all of these important societal things, but because that is what they choose to do. Okay? 7 out of 10, remember the stat, 7 out of 10 people that enter the public system are not studying what they want to, they study what they got placed for. Okay. We've got 250,000 people that are owing the state 18.5 billion rand in unpaid fees. Now, for me, the heart of this is your program qualification matrix. Okay? That system was designed to fund, to put in place the relevant skills for the RDP, and then GEAR, and then ASGISA, and then all of a sudden, nobody knows what happened after that. It was supposed to be the National Development Plan. We're pretending that our skills are aligned to the National Development Plan, but it's not really. Because what happens is when you're now trying to get a new program up and running, you now first have to convince some faculty somewhere to change their program. It takes 3 years, 5 years. You have to get approval from CHE, DHET, then you have to get it onto the PQM, then you have to make sure that if there's a professional body that they also approved, etc. And that's if you've even identified the need. So it takes 3 to 5 years before we can respond to the market. And I think that that's deeply challenging. And then when you actually do want to, for example, partner, and I've had many conversations with public institutions to partner, and you get to the brass tacks of it, if I partner with you, you have to take it off your PQM, okay? Because we haven't established a relationship in terms of collaboration. So I think I believe the professional bodies have also become a massive choke point. They are now limiting how many people can go there. On average, a university that educates nurses can do 20 to 40 per year. Okay? There's 28 of you guys, public institutions. There's about 100 of us guys. If all of us did it together, we can do maximum 1,000 nurses a year. How many do you think we need? We currently need about 70,000 nurses, yeah? Which means we need to produce about 8,500 nurses per year. Who's stopping that? It is the South African Nursing Council, okay? And they're not alone. It's the same with other professional bodies. They limit what can go into our industries because we have a planned skills economy, and it's not working. We now are running, we can train 70 medical scientists per institution per year, 20 psychologists per institution per year, and you have to have a master's degree to do that. And we've now run out of specialists to train doctors. I can show you the stats for that. Okay. So we have a real problem, and even if I decide to do something about that problem today, it will take me 2 to 5 years before I can do something as a public institution, or as any institution for that matter. My friend talked deeply about the unsustainable funding models. The minister has managed to increase his budget this year to 48 billion, 51 billion next year, 53 billion. If you actually work that back to cost per student, yeah, he doesn't have enough money to educate what is happening in there. The whole sector costs about 100 billion to run per year. And increasingly, we have to think about things like contract research, etc., just to be sustainable as an institution. And the issue is it's devaluing the role of undergraduates and other types of things as well. Okay. If I was a businessman, which I am, and I look at your debt as a percentage of your revenue, so how much do people end up owing you after studying with you, after you gave them a defective product, to be fair, I would ask myself, would this be a business that I want to be in? And I would say no, because it's a hard business, because you've got so much debt to collect from your customers, and you're not very good at it. So I actually have a plan for you, but I'll show you just now. But I just want to highlight how unsustainable your funding model is. I promise them if I get to stay for longer than 15 minutes, then this is a good sign. Cool. Okay, so here's the fun facts, which I love, but you won't like, okay? So 90% of the effort of the public space is going into those 208,000 people that you are offering bachelor's degrees to, okay? Cool. Interestingly enough, 50% of your degrees that you have on offer has less than 7% of people, 7 people per that degree. So you have like really unsustainable ways to actually think about why we should offer some degrees. We are, and Eduvos, I'm proud to say, offers 15% of all private higher certificates. Okay. We give the people with higher certificates and diploma passes and bachelor's passes pathways to get into education. And while it seems like, and when you read the official stats, it would say 20% of private of education is now offered by private. When you add what we do with private higher certificates and private diplomas, 1 in 3 students are now at a private institution. First-time entrants. Okay. You are privatizing higher education faster than I can. And how's this happening? Okay. It's happening by being not relevant to the output factors that are there. Yes, okay, great. So we can write 25,000 articles while China writes 800,000 articles a year. Do we want to measure articles? Is that why you send your kids to universities? No, you want them to be employed. You want them to be the leaders of the future. You want them to be better off than we are. Okay. I love this part, and sorry, the stats are big but small on screen. Okay. We get so fessed up with this thing called graduate unemployment rate. What nonsense. Stop it. Like, what are you talking about? Okay? Yes, the rate at which people seem to be unemployed that have graduate that graduated, yeah, seems to be increasing. It's not true. If you look at the number of unemployed people that have higher degrees, it's about 2% of them. But we, like 15%. Like, have you ever met a graduate that is unemployed? I haven't. They're not there. Yeah? So get over it. Stop this political narrative. Stop this nonsense. It's not useful. Okay? Good. Moving along swiftly. Before they kick me out. We are deeply misaligned with labor market needs and employment outcomes. Okay? And yes, I'm not proposing that we just teach people just physical skills at universities, but we deeply need to start aligning and understanding what qualification versus employment means, but we often focus rather on the education. Like, if I want to learn, and I'm going to spend 3 years in any degree, I'm going to learn something about philosophy, and I'm going to learn something about economy, and I'm going to learn something about creativity, etc. So the issue is, at that point in time, I need to be capable to enter the real world after that, day one. I go to conferences like this, and I ask you, what is your outcomes? And you sit there and say, we do not produce employable graduates. And I'm saying, yes, you are right. You do not produce employable graduates. Well, what do you want to do about it? Oh, no. Okay. We should be working with industry to produce employable graduates, something that my colleague also said. Yeah? So let's reorientate towards the industries of tomorrow. Okay? Let's reorientate towards the future. Our qualification framework's also not doing us a hell of a lot of favors. Yeah. And I'm sure if the CHE is in the room, I apologize deeply. SAQA, I apologize. DHET, please don't deregister me. Okay. We don't have interoperable qualification systems. Okay? We know this. But I'll tell you a story of a lady, Yasmin Smith. Okay? Yasmin Smith, top scholar in at school. Okay? Second generation colored lady. Well, first generation person that's actually going to university. She goes into university, and she, in her first year, fails a math module because she's petrified of math. Okay? She gets 90% in the rest of all of her qualifications, and she's 10 credits outstanding. At graduation, she walks and spends time with her mother and explains to her what happened. This math module is tripping her up. Mother goes to the university, says, kid needs 10 credits to pass a degree. University says, no. Says, can the kid re-enroll in that one? It's like, yes. Okay, next year, she gets to do the 10 credits. She fails it again. The year after that, they expel her. Okay? She goes to UNISA and has to redo 50% of the qualification before she can finish it. Is that the good use of human capital? That kid is 27 today and still has not got a qualification. She's not alone. Okay? There's 60,000 of these people with short little bits of outstanding qualifications. And for what? Some perception that we're driving an NQF that is like, yeah? Person goes, does 3 years of engineering, okay? Gets to some level, N6, whatever. Some formula that you do means that they now technically have NQF level 5, okay? Now they need to study more. 4 years later, they could possibly get something in engineering, if they get admission. What are we doing? What's the plan here? How are we putting skill into the market? How are we affirming the abilities of people? Yeah. Okay. So, so enough moaning. Let's talk about some potential solutions. Okay, so now I'm a businessman. I'm a private education. I don't have your constraints, so I can ask myself questions like this. Okay. If we have to employ 4.9 million youth, what the hell are they going to be doing? So let's figure it out. Okay. I reckon that's what they will be doing. Let's start maintaining our municipalities, something that I think is close to all of our hearts. We need about 1 million people to do that. Let's get into the tourism, retail, and hospitality industry, because this morning there was just not enough people serving breakfast at the hotel. Okay? I don't know why. Cool. That's a 700,000 people problem. Okay? IT, and working with all of these integrated IT frameworks, is a 600,000 people problem. Logistics, warehousing, e-commerce, 450,000 people opportunity. The care economy, that very same place where I told you we can only make 20 nurses a year, yeah? There is 400,000 people. And what's the biggest issue in all of your universities? Mental wellness, care, communities that are beating each other up, okay? Murder rates out of the roof. And please, I'm never ever going to stay on the 22nd floor of any hotel. Because that was not okay, what happened there. Okay. Energy build, output and grid, there's 350,000 there. Agro-processing, SME services, local trades, 230,000 people. Automotive and EV components. We're getting so stuck up with legislation around how do we empower people, okay, that we forget that the whole rest of the world is moving into solar vehicles and EVs, etc. And we have, in what I know, there's about 3 organizations in Africa that are training people for EV use right now. And then the creative industries and film, okay? And I've spent a lot of time recently traveling into Zambia, Ghana, other places in Africa, and it is alive. The creative industries are rocking, yeah? It's one of our biggest growth areas in private education. Graphic design, humanities, people who really want to do this stuff, okay? Critical thinking's alive. We don't live in yes, I'm not teaching people ancient Eastern, Middle Eastern cultures. Sorry if there's anybody here that studied that or is presenting it tomorrow. But that's the point, okay? We're doing that. So if we do all of this, it's interesting. Okay, so that's a big slide, and there's way too many numbers, and I probably should have designed it better, but that's okay. But I can, with structural unemployment, which is 7%, which through our labor legislation we managed to push to 20%, but let's keep it at 7%. That's what the people will be doing. Those are some of the jobs. Now, it might not be clear, but these little things with the little dots are things where regulations and licensing and nonsense from government is currently stopping us from making more. That needs to stop. So when we are cutting the red tape and taking the bureaucracy out of it, start there. Yeah? Why do I need to get a license to do a drone footage of this building? I need a helicopter license, man. I could be employing 10,000 drone, not 10,000, but maybe 1,000 drone engineers, okay, to do security. But I can't, because those people first need to qualify, go through an extensive process, et cetera, et cetera. Why are we imposing these constraints on ourselves? Now, I ask a second question, which I think is more relevant to this crowd, which sits and says, okay, if we need to do that, what do we need to do in our higher education institutions? Because it's different, okay? And because we need managers, engineers, scientists, nurses, midwives, administrators, technicians, entrepreneurs. And whereas everybody tells you that AI is going to take away jobs, AI is going to take away jobs in Europe and in America and in South America. We don't have jobs. They can't take it away. We can only get better people. Okay. So let's do that. Okay. So anyway, now I boiled it down to these are like really severe opportunities and moderate opportunities. Okay. And I can tell you right now, we don't have the qualifications for this at our institutions today. Okay. Good. 2 minutes. Yes, I'm almost done. Great, because you also want to say something. So, I want to show you another thing that we're doing. So let's take the money that you are owed by the people that studied at your places that didn't pay you. Okay, let's figure out how to get that back. Okay, cool. So let's do RPL, recognition of prior learning. Let's take Jasmine Smith, and let's recognize the fact that she's been trying to work out how to pay for UNISA for 5 years after her first degree, so she can get the 10 credits for the math. Okay, and let's run her through RPL. So, and we've seen that there's 100,000 RPL potentially graduates. Right now, even in the Western Cape where we're piloting this, we know 20,000 people are entering the partial qualifications system every year. And let's create a platform to do that, okay? And we're doing that, and we've done it already. So there's a website, Quick RPL, which we soft launched last week. We've already had 20 people on the program. And we reckon we're going to make a fair amount of money doing RPLs. But at the same time, we're going to be enabling those people to get jobs. And if every one of those people only get a job for 15,000 Rand a month, okay, we can add 18 billion Rands worth of productivity back into the economy and 5.4 billion in tax, so that my tax rate doesn't have to go up next year. Okay. This is the way we should start thinking. Last one, and then I'll let my colleagues go there. I think these are some of the things that we need to do to reform higher education. We need to fast-track high-priority accreditations. We need to sit down with industry and design future industries with investors, invest in it, and start to grow. De-link your PQM and your funding. Yeah? What the person studies and what government pays for. Why does it need to be a political decision? Become free. Academic freedom, it's a thing. Focus on funding jobs of the future in collaboration with industry and not just specific degrees. Work integrated learning at scale. Apply diplomas and technology tracks that integrate into degrees. Stop doing this vocational stuff and the degree stuff and saying TVETs and CETs and things and stuff. Just put it all together, start running proper institutions. Accelerate the development of instructor capacity, which we know is a big issue. Solve this issue with professional bodies, because it's not healthy. Finalize this idea of micro-credentials and stackability and RPL, etc. If I'm telling you we're launching this thing with RPL, hey, the legislative framework that is around it is very, very complex, and it's unnecessary, and that's what's stopping it from. Let's work on a regional basis with education institutions and industry, municipalities, and let's do strong career services and demand tracking. And then I think we can end there to say we need to move from dialogue to action. We really need to focus, like my colleague said, on enhancing graduate outcomes, and then we will empower the nation. Okay. We don't have to be captured by any ideology. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to be clear, he's not suggesting that we turn into an anarchy that is disregarding of any qualifying standards, but perhaps we can be a little bit more efficient in terms of how we process that. Chris, I want us to focus more on the solutions that Riaan had presented there. I think we all know the challenges that are faced by the sector, by the students themselves, and therefore by the country. But that long list of things that he says, if we do that now and do it to scale, it's actually going to help address those challenges. Your response?
And it's about doing it as quickly as possible, given the current domestic political environment and the global environment. So with so much change happening, those countries, those sectors, those businesses, and I want to say public businesses as well, because ultimately you're serving customers in the public sector. The faster you move in implementing some of these things and figuring out, given your own organizational skills, weaknesses, strengths, et cetera, the faster you can move on that globally, you're also going to be more competitive. And unfortunately or unfortunately, at this point in time, given the changes happening around the world, either you sort of shape up, or over time you're stagnant. And if you're stagnant in this current environment, you are further and further behind. So I can't stress enough, it's a big responsibility, it's a big burden, but we have a gap now in South Africa with all the challenges that Riaan and others before have highlighted correctly. Given our upside potential, I've been fortunate this year to speak to businesses in the US, in Europe, in Latin America. On Friday, last week Friday, I just got back from Argentina. For all the talk of reform and things changing there, South Africa and Africa's upside potential is ridiculous. And if we can get some of these very basics right, I think the exponential improvement is massive. So I don't want to discount the challenges, but it definitely is there if you look at some of what Riaan especially has highlighted in terms of implementing.
And what would you prioritize? We're not going to get all
Yeah,
this
yeah,
done in a quick amount of time. But if you could pick 2 or 3 that if we focus all our attention on it, it will actually get us a little bit closer.
I think any of those on the list specifically that are geared towards incentives, and in terms, what I mean by that is bringing in, new students, and then also in terms of your outcomes, in terms of incentives. So it's about what does that do to improving you organizationally, administratively, and then how you equip those students going out? Because then it's also word of mouth. They see it in how they're then employable, but also in terms of how they refer to others, or it sort of pushes others to compete as well. So I think those, especially if you can sort of do a matrix, if you can do maybe a Venn diagram, take those specifically in incentives, I think that'll do a lot. It wasn't specifically on the list, and I know it's difficult. Again, I don't want to discount the challenge. But the issue around not waiting for direction or directives from national level, that isn't to say that you go off and do your own thing, given that it is public institutions, but giving the drive from your side with maybe some other institutions, and pushing in that kind of way because of the skills and the fiscal constraints from a national point of view. Given our low growth situation, I don't see that changing anytime soon, but we can't wait for the directive to come. So there's an element of, I know it's daunting and it's a big challenge to try and tackle, but if you can look at that point as well around what sort of vibrancy and activity you can unlock in partnership with the other public sector institutions and the private sector, you're going to put yourself up and your institution up very well, I think, going forward.
I think the failed realization in the National Development Plan, and some would argue that the national dialogue, unless they address certain things, it's not going to help us, is that we were meant to have a blueprint that would have informed all of the education sector. This is our focus. This is where we need to go to, and therefore that's where everybody goes. Because, and this is a question for both of you, how do you delicately manage the agility within which higher education needs to respond to what market needs, but still be serving a public good?
Okay, and my question back at this point in time would be, is having a market not the public good? Because right now we are de-industrializing faster than we are industrializing. We are exporting raw goods and not beneficiating them. We are increasingly planning to shift from colonial master number 1 being the British, to colonial master number 2 being the Americans, to shunning them and getting colonial master number 3, which is the Chinese. Okay, so why? They want something that's here, so why aren't we? I'm African. I live in Africa. This needs to work. Africa is too rich to be poor. And the biggest lever that we can pull to change that is education. And if we're not right now hyper-focused on the national outcomes, then what is the point of education? Is it to write a better philosophy paper? Yeah? Is it to have a better comparative view of how bad we are relative to the world? If you go into Africa right now, it is vibrant. It is alive. If you go into South Africa, it's depressing. Why? We're part of the same continent, but we somehow have got stuck in our own narrative, in our own navel-gazing. We're looking for something, and we're waiting for somebody to tell us what it is. And partly because the system's been designed like that. It was designed to be run by a small group of people, and they're not there. The masters have left. They're absent. And with respect, names like Carter Asmal, brilliant visionary, but he's not running the system anymore, but he put the system together. Who is this new generation? If you look at the rugby 3 weeks ago, that second half, when those people ran onto the field, and it's just a new team, and they won in that second half. my first thought is, who's our new team as this country? Where's the new team? We need that new team. And I believe that they're sitting here, and we have the pen, we're writing. This is our watch.
Except, as Professor Ernest indicated earlier, they have to exist within a certain defined parameters and constraints, Chris.
That I take on board, but to link it, maybe we're going to kill the rugby analogy here. You've got your game plan, and it's one thing to run out with that, but you have to change it and adapt it based on what you face on the day, on the field. So someone like Sasha, for him at 23 years old, to take the ball from people like Eben and others who are much more senior and say, I'm going to do this, he realized what was in front of him. So you work within a system, and I take your point on the sort of national government system, you can have that, but you've got to give people that kind of room to then take the ball and run with it. And then, if they do it very well, especially, to learn from that and implement it elsewhere, where it's not just a case of we're too scared to try and innovate because we're worried about the failure and whose political toes we're stepping on, but we give people that kind of freedom to try things and to push it. And then maybe you'll see some kind of that vibrancy and that innovation. So I'm not saying it's easy, because it is vested interests, it is a concern about using resources well, it is all of that. But if you don't push the envelope in some areas, in different ways, so in public and private education, us as analysts, in the media, all of that kind of different kinds of competition, then I think the overall system remains what it is. You don't see even incremental improvements or reform. I don't think we should be under any illusions. Dr. Jameen talked about the potential of the GNU, for example, that a bit of a sugar high that has now run out. Maybe again, because we thought, it's just a different kind of national government and it'll fix everything, on its own. We shouldn't place that on ourselves or on anyone in national government to say, let's just get the right people in there. The change is going to come from national to provincial to even local levels in all of these different sectors, I think, and it's going to change in small increments. I don't think we should put it on any one person or one department to say, let's just get them in there and it's all hunky-dory.
Well, this is the higher education sector. They're like case studies.
Sure.
Where have we seen a best example of identifying the challenges, putting together solutions, implementing them efficiently, and then turning ultimately the economy around? I think of South Korea, for example, who at some point had a smaller GDP than what Ghana has, and yet they are a world player as far as innovation, technology, manufacturing, and production, and ultimately GDP.
So the Martin Trust Center, which is the entrepreneurial division of MIT, is 450 square meters big, so pretty much as big as this hall. And they take people walking in through the front door and they support them to build industries and walk out the other door. Okay? So why do you go to MIT? It's to be famous, to be that person that is going to drive your industry. Okay? So they make industry makers. Okay? They have created $2.3 trillion worth of businesses through that mechanism. And what do we complain about? We don't have space at our universities, we don't have the right resources. All of you are in purchasing, etc. But we're not utilizing what we've got. Okay? And to write the rugby analogy, Sasha had the same 80 minutes as anybody else. Okay? But what did they do in that 80 minutes? And that's what we need to start thinking about differently, is how are we supporting the industry makers? Okay? Who are we supporting them with once you have those industries, and who are we then employing in those industries? Okay, and that's the blueprint that we're talking about, not some document written by DTI in a conference room. That's not it. Yeah, it's the future. Where are my kids going to work? Where are your kids going to work? What are they going to do? Let's start building those things. Let's start enthusing them, getting them into rooms, building supports that then say, you've got an idea. How do we make that work? And that's where AI is great. So AI is not going to take away jobs, it's going to make jobs. Because all of a sudden I don't need to worry. I can actually put together a legal agreement. It's still going to be flawed, so I'm still going to need a paralegal later so that they can read the thing and so they say, oh, you missed a couple of things. But the point is we can get people off the starting blocks faster.
Wasn't there a lawyer that used AI to write an argument and the court found this out and decided to...
It's in the US, I think. Yeah.
Was it in the US?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want that lawyer. We have time for 2 or 3 questions. Show of hands, please, and a microphone will come to you. It doesn't even have to be a question. It could be a reflection on what Riaan initially set out as a context and then what Chris has responded to, particularly in that area of, well, let's not wait for national government necessarily to start implementing change that will be serving what South Africa needs. All good? Everybody hungry?
Wow.
All right.
Cool.
Were you just stretching, sir, or do you need a microphone? Just stretching. Okay, cool. Perhaps then concluding thoughts. Let me start with you, Chris. How do we get South Africa not only acknowledging that we need to reform, I would argue all of education, not just higher education, because as I highlighted, what we're outputting from primary and secondary education is challenging already, because then you have to put in place interventions as universities in order to get them up to a certain level to deal with the rigor and the demands of universities, right? But how do we get people to move beyond the acknowledgement that we need to reform and actually start reforming?
It might be a bit of sort of a snowball avalanche effect. So if people can see in some provinces or in some metros or in parts of national that there are different kinds of discussions happening and different ideas being proposed, then it feeds on itself, and then others can implement it in their given context. I think there is already a wide-scale acknowledgement, and I'm going to link this to polling that we do every year, where for the last 15 years, when you ask South Africans, what are your top 2 priorities that you want government to focus on? The top 2 are always unemployment and crime, and number 3 is education. So across the board, across racial lines, across income strata, South Africans want good schools, good education. They want to equip their children to have a better life than they had. I think there's that psychological, that emotional acknowledgement already. If we can have those kinds of shifts that I mentioned in the first part of the answer, then you're going to start to see even more pushing and incentivizing for, why should I send my child to your institution or to yours or to this province or to that? And the narrative consistently in the last 5 years has been around the Western Cape. If you talk about the upside potential of KwaZulu-Natal and the Eastern Cape from a population point of view, from a manufacturing point of view, from a tourism point of view, those institutions, especially in some of those provinces in our country, if they can get some of these things right, I think it feeds on itself and it pushes others in the Western Cape and in Gauteng and elsewhere and globally to then have to compete for that South African skill, that capacity. We ad nauseum talk about South Africa's demographic dividend and potential. We talk about transforming the economy. Education is arguably the most important lever in that regard, and the changes are going to come through small things. I think we mustn't wait for a National Development Plan 2.0 kind of thing. We have to do it through that kind of pushing each other.
And then I'm going to give you the final challenge of the afternoon, Riaan. What's the one thing that this sector is doing right?
They're listening to me. No, okay. I think it is, the sector is, interestingly enough, our growth is not at your expense. Okay, so we have 1 million people in your system today. Okay, there's just much more that we need to do. I think for me the opportunity here is public-private partnership. Okay, and I know that we sit and say that this is like, it's said and said and said and said, but it is. It is for us to sit and say, we don't have the same constraints that you do. You have a lot that you can give, but you are constrained. So how do we marry those 2 ideas? Okay, how do we just set up regional engineering centers jointly, okay, where we can actually go and utilize the great curricula that you've got, and we can build the facilities, and we train more engineers. And we send those people to municipalities so that we can have water. simple, but not, okay? Because in that fight, we're going to have to really fight hard with some people, because they're going to sit and say, but it can't happen. But it can, because we can make it happen. So why can't it happen?
And there is an appetite from private education
Massive.
to move in this direction.
Huge.
Okay.
Okay, so we are not scared, and we don't have to do it at each other's expense, okay? And I had this conversation with a public institution recently, and I said, but how are we going to make sure that we still get the best people to come study at our university? I said, you can have first choice. I don't mind. Let's just train the engineers. Let's not get stuck on the little things, okay? Let's start focusing on the big picture, which is the future of South Africa.
All right. Round of applause, please, for Dr. Riaan Steenberg and for Chris Hattingh on some wonderful provocations around how we can reform this higher education